Hey, everybody, welcome back to Reason and Theology. Continuing here with our Basics of Biblical Hebrew, Lecture 22 with Louis Dizon, our instructor. Louis, welcome back to the show. How you been?
I'm doing great.
Yeah,
Been I don't know coping with allergy season.
yeah,
So if you see me blow my nose a few times during the stream,
yeah.
apologies in advance.
Oh,
Other
no
than
problem.
that, I'm doing great.
I know how that goes. I always struggle
Yeah,
with allergies during the stream around this time of the year, so
yeah. They seem to be
completely get it.
extra bad this year.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. But
it could get pretty rough here with all the pollen. So yeah, I know how that goes. But yeah, if you want to take it away and share your screen, we can get started here.
yep, I am pulling it up right now.
Sure.
There we go.
There it
So
is.
we are on lecture number 22, and this is on the second Vav uh, verb, and we're going to continue our translation of both the second chapter of Genesis as well as the fourth chapter of Ruth. So we're going to begin, as is our custom, by translating from Genesis, and then after that, we'll get to the grammar lesson. So, for those who remember, we left off with translating up to Genesis 2:17 where it says where God told Adam not to eat from the fruit. Now this is the part where God creates Eve. So let's dive into the text. So and as usual, I'm using a Hebrew English interlinear. So the rarer words, those that occur less than 35 times, have been pre-translated for us. So verse 18 says, Vayomer Adonai Elohim, lo tov heyot ha'adam levado, ese lo ezer kenegdo. So, and the Lord God said, it is not tov, it is not good for the man to be alone. So, heyot is to be, and levado is alone. I will make for him a helper corresponding to him. So kenegdo is an interesting word. So you'll notice the word neged there, which is beside or next to. So kenegdo is like it's a little tricky to translate, but the best way to render it idiomatically in English would be corresponding to him or to be at his side. So after that, you get to verse 19. You got the creation of the animals. Um, Vayitzer Adonai Elohim min ha'adama kol hayat hasadeh ve'et kol of hashmaim vayavo el ha'adam lirot ma yikra lo v'chol asher yikra lo ha'adam nefesh chaya hu shmo. So you've got and the Lord God formed from the ground every wild beast of the field and every bird of the heavens, and he brought to the man to see what he would call it, and all which he called it, or all which the man called it, that is to say, the living creature, that is its name. So let's parse the verbs, but for these two verses. So Vayomer is the vital form of Amar, third masculine singular. Heyot, which we uh, saw already, is from Haya. It is the Kal infinitive construct. Ese is Kal, perfect, third masculine singular, from Asa, to make or to do. Vaitzer, this is a verb that we don't come across as often. It's the Vaiktol form of, um, let me see, Yatsar, and that is the PL. Um, well, actually, no, that's PL. That's a Kal. I don't know why I thought it was a PL, but it's the third masculine singular, so he formed. And then the next verb, Vayave, is from Vo, and that is a Vaiktol. Once again, it is a Kal, third masculine singular. Sorry, that's a he feel. This is where it gets tricky because um, he feels sometimes because the vav in the middle sometimes drops out. In fact, that's related to the grammar lesson we'll be talking about shortly. The vav will drop in certain forms. In this case, the he feel form, the it becomes Yahweh, Vayaveh. Um, and then lir ot is the call infinitive construct of ra'ah, to see, and then yikra, kal, third masculine singular imperfect of kara, to call, and that's all the verbs. And then next, verse 20. Vayikra ha'adam shemot l'chol habehema ul'of hashamayim ul'chol chayat hasadeh ul'adam lo matza ezer kenegdo. And the man called the names of all the creatures and the birds of the sky or the heavens and all the wild beasts of the field. And yet, for the man, there was not found an helper corresponding to him. So Vaikra is the Vaiktol form of Kara. Um, and then Matsa, the basic form, Kal, third masculine singular perfect. To find, there was not found for him. So in verse 21, we see this. Vayapel Adonai Elohim tardema al ha'adam vayishan vayikach achat mitzalotav vayisgor basar tachtena. So, and the Lord God um, caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and he slept, and he took one of his ribs, and he closed the flesh um, after it or under it. So Vayapel is from Nafal. So this is another example of a weak verb. The letter nun, which is part of the root, drops out. We'll learn more about that when we get to first noon verbs later down the road. But you can see it becomes yapel, third masculine singular, Vaiktol form. And then Vaishan is the Kal Vaiktol, third masculine singular of Yashan, which is to sleep. So in this case, both the Yod and the Nun are retained, although you can see here that the Yod has coalesced. We've talked about this in the previous lesson, how sometimes the Yod coalesces, so it loses its consonantal value. It's still there, but it's there as part of the long vowel now. Vaikach is from lakach, again, a first it is a first Yod verb, so actually no, it's a first lamed verb, so the lamed drops out in this case. So lakach, the lamed drops, so it becomes vaikach, third masculine singular. Vaisgor, that is another kal tall third masculine singular from sagar, which means to close. Um, And then verse 22. Vayiven Adonai Elohim et hatzela asher lakach min ha'adam laisha vayiveha el ha'adam. And the Lord God built the rib which he took from the man into a woman, or he fashioned it into a woman, um, and he brought to the man, and he brought to her to the man. So Vayiven is from Bana. It's a Kalvik third masculine singular. The hey drops out. So as we'll learn, the hey which is a guttural, is another weak stem, weak root, which drops out. And then lakach, basic form. Um, Vayavieha is the he feel form of vo in the vaiktol, third masculine singular. So notice that once again, the second root drops out. Verse 23. Vayomer ha'adam, zot hapa'am, etzem ma'atzmai, uvasar mivsari, lazot yikare isha ki meish lukach. And the man said, This at last is bone from my bone and flesh from my flesh, and this shall be called woman, for from the man this was taken. So let me see. Vayomer, we already saw plenty of that. And then Yikare is from Kara. This is looks like a PL. Yep, that is a sorry, not a PL. It's a Nifal. It's a Nifal third masculine singular, um, which is interesting because um, even though it is a masculine verb, it is modifying a feminine noun. Um, that is to say, Isha. That's one of the funky things that sometimes Hebrew does. Occasionally, it will use a masculine form where you would otherwise expect a feminine. Um, or two more verses. Oh, actually, before we do that, Lukachazot is a pu'al form of Lukach in the third feminine singular. So now we've seen a pu'al in the wild. All right, verse 24. Al ken ya'azav ish et aviv ve'et imo ודבק באשתו והיו לבשר אחד. Um, and for this reason, or therefore, um, literally it's upon thus, but idiomatically you would want to translate this as then, thus, or therefore. The man will leave his father and his mother and cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So Ya'azav is the Kal imperfect third masculine singular of Azav, to leave, um, and then Vedavach is the Vekatal form of Davak, to cleave, third masculine singular, and then Hayu is the Vaiktol of Haya, third masculine plural, and they will be. One more verse. ויהיו שניהם ערומים האדם ואשתו ולא יתבוששו. So, ויהיו, and the two of them were naked, the man and his wife, and they were not ashamed. So once again, ויהיו, that is the Vaiktol, third masculine plural, and then yitboshashu is an interesting one. It is from bush, to be ashamed, but in the hitpael form, hitpolel form rather. That's one of those um, lesser stems. Remember, we covered 7 common stems, and then there were a number of less common stems. So hitpolel is one of those rare stems. Um, and the way you know it's a hitpolel is the third root, the sheen doubles. Yitboshashu. Um, so it's similar in form to the hitpael. It has a similar preformative to a hitpael, but differs from the hitpael in the doubling of the sheen here. So tune in next week. So when we cover chapter 3 of Genesis. Now we'll move to the lesson. So you'll remember we've covered both the third and the first vav yod verbs. So we know what to expect when a yod or a vav appears in either the beginning or the end of the stem. Usually, if it occurs in those two positions, it will turn into something else. So a first vav will turn into a yod. A third vav or yod will frequently turn into a hey. So it's not always immediately obvious when you're dealing with a third vav yod verb or a first vav verb. Second vav yod verbs um, are generally easy to identify. Um, there are basically three that will occur with relative frequency, and these are the verbs kum, sim, and vo. You may have noticed, for example, when we were translating Genesis, that the verb vo appeared multiple times in the text, and in several of those cases, the middle root, the vav, drops out. Um, when we translate the book of Ruth, you will also find instances of sim and kum there. So it's important to know uh, how to spot a second vav yod verb when we're going to translate this text in a short little while. So just like with the first vav in yod verb, the second vav yod likes to drop or coalesce. Um, the general rule that you're gonna remember, actually, let's go to the summary section. Uh, the second vav yod has two basic forms, short and long. So these are not exactly the same as dropping coalescing because it's possible for the vav and the yod to drop but then replaced by a different vav, which is not part of the root but is just there to facilitate pronunciation. So it's technically dropped, but it still looks like it's still there. So instead of dropping and coalescing, think in terms of short and long. And the easy way to remember this is that the perfect form and the participle form of the vav yod, second vav yod, tends to be short, and then the other forms tend to be long. And here are some of the examples. So using kum as the as our example verb, the third masculine singular perfect form is come. So you'll see that the uh, vav drops out, and then a comment is placed underneath the kof. And then the participle is the same form, come. How do you tell difference between whether it's the perfect verb or the participle? Context. And then from here, you get all the different permutations. So with the perfect, you get kama, kamu, uh, what else? Uh, kam, kamnu, kamti, etc. Uh, And then with the participle, you have kama, kamim, kamot. And now the long forms are kum for the infinitive construct. This is the basic form of the verb, by the way. Um, so with these weak verbs, we tend to use the infinitive construct as the basic form. And then the imperfect is yakum, and then jussive form is, uh, interestingly here, it's yakumu, and then there's the short form yakom. So sometimes it does shorten. And then the verb consecutive, yakumu, vayakumu, and then you have vayakom. Imperative looks similar to the infinitive's construct, cum. How do you tell the difference? Once again, context. Passive participle, again, cum. Again, these are differentiated by context. And an infinitive absolute is cum. This one, you'll notice that instead of a shurek vav, this is a cholem vav. So the dot is at the top. In these three other forms, the dot is in the middle. So going back, so what are some of the basic principles that we need to remember? One is that second vowel verbs, in addition to the second root being weak, they also tend to be weak at the front of the verb. So you can see here, um, it tends to shorten. So whenever the preformative vowel stands in a closed and accented syllable is short. Um, so yeah, you don't have to worry too much about that. The back of the verb tends to change as well. So here is where it gets slightly confusing because sometimes a helping vowel gets added at the front. So hakimota. So where does that cholim vav come from? That's not supposed to be part of it, but it's been added to facilitate the pronunciation of the verb. So this is the second masculine singular perfect form in the he field. Now, the the different stems have different tendencies when it comes to the second verb. Sorry, the second root. The kal, the tendency is for it to either drop or coalesce, whereas with the nifal, the tendency is to simply coalesce. The pl, the he feel, the PL, Hitpael, Hifil, and Hofal all tend to drop. The one exception is with the PL and Hitpael, they tend to drop um, when it is in the strong form. So so each stem has a different tendency with regards to this. This we already discussed this. Um, yeah. So a lot of these come with practice. So it's actually the descriptions here tend to be a little dense. So I'm gonna try not to dwell too much on this. Basically, you don't have to memorize different forms. So um, because there are way too many permutations for you to remember each one of them, it's better to just try to remember the general principles. For example, here's a little table showing how they tend to change. Um, and there's a difference between the call active and the call stative. The main difference is that with the call active, the second root tends to predictably have a patach, whereas in the stative, it can be and it can be any different vowel. So kavad, to be heavy or to be glorious. Um, so you'll see that in the second vavyod, there in the perfect form, there's a tendency for the active to have a fairly consistent vowel, which is the kamets. Here, you'll notice that there are different permutations of it. Vosh, bosh, he was ashamed. Notice that the short vowel is a cholen, whereas with he died or he was dead, it's met with a tsere. And then he was high is ram with the comments. And then in the imperfect form, you'll notice that yakum, yasim, yavo, um, these are all these are all forms in which the yeah, it's fairly easy to remember because they still look similar to the basic form. Yavosh, in this case, what has happened here, because the basic form is vush, um, there was what you call um, coalescing that happened here. What happened is that um, normally it would be yavaush, but Hebrew does not like the ow sound, so it ow tends to turn into o. So what happens is that the combination of the comets and the Shurek Vav turn into a Cholem Vav in this case. So Yevosh. So yeah, no need to worry too much about that. I'm just gonna show you really quickly the tables so that you know what the different forms of each are. So as I mentioned, with the participle, for example, you got kam, kama, kamin, kamot. In the perfect, you have kam, kama, kamta, kamt, kamti. Um, in all these cases, the vav in the middle has dropped out, whereas in all the other forms, the vav is still there. So kum, yakum, yakumu, yakumu, kum. Uh, in general, it's easy to identify these forms since they tend to be common vocabulary items. Now, moving forward, we're going to do two chapters in one because this textbook, for whatever reason, decided to split the second Vav Yod into two chapters. But I'd see no need for them to be discussed separately, so we're going to do both chapters at the same time. So, in the same principles that we just saw apply for the other paradigms as well, which is that the perfect and the participle tend to be short, and then everything else tends to be long. Um, so, as you can see here, this tends to apply across the board. The lexical form of every verb, regardless of its stem, is the kal infinitive construct. So, cum, sim, and vo. One of the rules that you'll learn is that preformative vowels appear in open, unaccented syllables. Um, so Yakum, you've got a kamets, and then Hekim, you have a tsere. Um, so here, in the first case, you preserve the historical preformative vowels in the colony file, and then in the rest, you adjust according to vowel rules. Hekim, in this case, it lengthens, and it reduces in the um, third common plural. So hakimin, hakimanu. So yeah, the in this case it shortens into a patach. And as you mentioned, sometimes there's a helping vowel. So two examples here. You have hakimot. We discussed earlier. We saw earlier actually an example of this. So this is not part of the stem. This is added to facilitate the pronunciation. Hakimota. Um, and then takimena. So here in this case, the helping vowel that was added is a vav. Um, and then the final rule is that in place of the PL, the pual and the hit pael, second vav yod tends to prefer the form polel, polal, and hit polel. And we saw that earlier in Genesis 2:25. Yit boshashu. Instead of a hit pa'el, Hebrew opts for a hit polel with bush because it is easier with a second vav verb such as bush. So yeah, so kum is another example of this. So instead of So you got komem, which is the polel form, komam, which is the polal form, and then hit komem, which is the hit polel form, and this takes the place of the PL pual hit pal respectively. Now, some forms um, still have the PL pual hit pal, uh, but that's less common. So here we see, for example, tzava. Tzava is to command. Notice that the second root is a vav. Now, in this case, it does have a true PL. It's tziva or in the first person form, it's CVT. And you'll see that one of the interesting things that happens here is Tsava has two weak roots. So the middle root is weak, that's the Vav, but the third root is also weak. It's a historic Yod. So this is both a second and a third Vav Yod, but it's not immediately obvious because the Yod here has turned into a Hey. If you ever decide to learn Aramaic down the road, it actually retains the third Yods in most of them. They don't turn into Heys like they do in Hebrew. So Gala in Hebrew is Gali in Aramaic, Sava in Hebrew, it's Sawi in Aramaic. Just a little fun fact. So what happens is that the in the third common singular, it's CVT. So notice that the yod turns back in the hay turns back into a yod in this case, and there's a bit of coalescing. So it loses its consonantal value. It turns into a long vowel in this case. So yeah, this is just the basic forms that we already saw. And here is a table showing you all the different forms of the polel and the polal. So yeah, you don't need to memorize this once again. We're trying not to memorize paradigms, but principles. But it's good for you to at least see what they look like so that it would be easy for you to identify them. And you get a basic sense of how to identify them. So the one thing that they all have in common, the mem is reduplicated. There are two mems sitting next to each other. And the tendency is that um, assume if it's not the last syllable, there's going to be a shva on one of them to indicate um, the end or beginning of a syllable. And then there's the he feel form. Um, he feels are fairly straightforward, so they tend to have forms that both long and short forms. So here, actually, interestingly, the perfect and the participle are long. So hekim and mekim. And from this, you can basically infer all the other forms. So mekim, you get mekimim, mekimot, mekima, etc. With the yeah, and then they're same here, hakim, and then yakim, and then the other forms is where they tend to drop or coalesce. So yakem, vayakem, hakem, and then hakem. So notice that here it is long in the perfect and the participle, and then it is short um, elsewhere, which is different from the kal. In the kal, it's actually the other way around. The perfect and the participle is short, whereas the other forms are long. And then finally, the hofal, we get hukam as the basic hofal form. Um, and then, let me see, we got hukam, mukam, hukam, yukam, vayukam, and then hukem. One of the things you might notice, they're all long. So in this case, the pual is actually no. In this case, they're all short. The vav has dropped out in every single case here. Um, so there, so this will be fairly easy to identify. Puals are fairly straightforward. So that, in a nutshell, is how to identify a second vav yod verb. So at this point, we've discussed every permutation of the Vav Yod verb. We've got Vav Yod as it appears in the third position, the first position, and the second position. But as you can see in the table of contents on the left hand side, there are many other forms of the weak verb to learn. You've got geminates, which is when you've got two of the same um, letter. You've got noon verbs, um, usually, and in this case specifically, noon verbs where it occurs in the first position. You've got gutturals, which are um, ayin, chet, hey, and aleph, and this can occur in all three positions. And that's basically it. Third aleph gets its own chart here at the very last chapter. So those are the remaining weak verbs that we'll be discussing down the road. So tune in for that. And now for our continuation of the Book of Ruth. So we're actually just about done with Ruth. And then in the remaining four sessions after this, we're going to translate the book of Jonah next. Jonah being the other book of the Bible that is fairly easy to translate for beginners in Hebrew. So we'll do this. I'm going to um, translate. I'm going to pronounce, then translate, then parse, as is custom. So, first verse. Uvoaz Allah hasha'ar, vayeshev sham, vahine hagoel over asher diber Boaz, vayomer, surah, shva po, ploni almoni, vayasar, vayeshev. And Boaz went up to the gate, and he sat there. And behold, the Redeemer was crossing, who Boaz spoke about. And he said, turn aside, sit here, certain somebody. And he turned aside and he sat. So, ploni almoni is a very interesting verb in Hebrew. Um, Basically means a certain somebody or so and so. Most translations will render that as friend, but that's not what it is. One of my favorite renderings of this passage is in the Net Bible, where it says, let me pull it up just now. Sit down, John Doe. So that has got to win the award for the um, most creative translation of Ploni Almoni. It's basically to indicate the fact that this person, his name does not need to concern us. We have no need to know who this man is, and it's probably best for his sake that he remain anonymous because you don't want to be known as the guy who wouldn't redeem Ruth. In verse, no, sorry, we should parse the verbs. Allah is to third masculine singular, Kal perfect to go up. Vayeshev is the Kal Victol third masculine singular of Yashav, sit, he sat. Um, Go, and then Over is the Kal participle masculine singular of Avar to cross over or to pass by. Diber is the PL perfect third masculine singular of davar to speak. Vayomer, we already know what that is. Surah is a, a kal imperative of sur to turn aside. Notice that the comments hey has been added. Um, so that is to facilitate pronunciation. Jva, again, that is a kal imperative masculine singular of of yashav. Um, in this case, the yod has dropped out, so it becomes shav, shva. The comma's he is added there to facilitate pronunciation. And then you get the Vaiktol forms of both in the third masculine singular. Vayasar, Vayeshev. Verse 2. Vaikach asara anashim mizikne ha'ir vayomer shvupo vayeshevu. And he took 10 men among the elders of the city, and he said, "Sit here." And they sat. Again, we already know all of these. So Vaikach is, um, oopsie, it's from the Vaiktol form of Lakach. And then Shvu is the masculine plural call imperative of Shuv. So the difference between Shiva is it's singular, whereas Shvu is plural. Vayeshevu is the plural form of Vayeshev. Verse 3. Vayomer la Goel Chelkat hasadeh asher la'achinu le'elimelech machra Naomi hashava misde Moav. And he said to the Redeemer, the portion of the field which belongs to our brother Elimelech, um, Naomi is selling. So, who is returning from the field of Moab. So, a couple of interesting notes here. Naomi and her husband would have sold the property when they moved to Moab. The responsibility of the kinsman redeemer was to buy the property back on Naomi's behalf. So, which Naomi sold rather. So, and then Hashava is interesting. So this looks like a participle, but according to this note, it's actually not. It is a perfect verb. So the way it is accented identifies it as a perfect. Funny thing though, it would make sense for it to be a participle. This is where you would normally um, place a participle. Um, but contextually, it would make better sense for it to be a perfect. And the Masoretes decided to um, vowel it accordingly. So Vayomer, you already know what that is. Makra is from makar, to sell. It is the Kal perfect third feminine singular because Naomi is the one who did the selling. Hashava is from Shuv. It is the Kal perfect third feminine singular. She returned. Verse 4. Ve'ani amarti egle oznecha lemor kne neged hayoshvim v'neged zikne ami im tig'al g'al v'im lo yig'al hagida li ve'eda ki en zulatcha lig'ol. And I have said, I will open your ear, literally, I will tell you, just saying, by, in the presence of those sitting and in the presence of the elders of the people, uh, if you will redeem, if you will surely, if you will redeem, he redeemed, and if you will not redeem, tell me, and I will know, for uh, there is no relative to redeem. Actually, is it relative? There is no one apart from you to redeem it. So, yeah. They want you to look this up in the lexicon. So, makes sense. Um, so basically, Boaz is telling Ploni Almoni, let me know right now. Can you redeem this or not? And he is willing at first, but then he changes his mind later on, as we'll see. So amarti is the kal perfect first common singular of amar. Egal is the kal imperfect first common singular of gala, which is um, in this case to open. In other contexts, it can be to reveal. Way more. Infinitive construct of amar. Kne is from kana, means to acquire. It is the masculine um, singular imperative form. Um, Yoshvim is a kal participle, masculine plural, those sitting. In this case, it's functioning as a noun. Tig-al is the third masculine singular kal imperfect of Gaal, to redeem. And then Gaal here is an um, infinitive construct. So remember, sometimes the imperfect and the infinitive are placed next to each other. Here's another example of that. And then Yigal, um, interesting here. You would normally expect the second person, but here the third person is used. And a note, it says third person active verbs are sometimes used in an impersonal sense, almost like a passive. Someone is not going to redeem. Um, so, yeah, this is very interesting, but we're still gonna translate it as a second person um, for ease of translation. So, third person, masculine singular of Gaal in the Kal imperfect. Hagida is he feel imperative, second masculine singular. So tell. And I will know is the Vaiktol form of Yada in the first common singular. The Yod has dropped out, as you can see. Yeah, Ligol is the infinitive construct of Gaal. Oh, and I forgot this last bit. Ve'anochi acharecha vayomer anochi egal. And I am after you, and I will redeem. Verse 5. Vayomer Boaz, Bayom knotcha hasade miyad Naomi, umeet Ruth, hamoaviot eshet hamet kaniti, lehekim shem hamet al nachalato. So, and Boaz said, on the day that you acquire the field from the hand of Naomi, um, and from Ruth the Moabite, the wife of the deceased, you acquire him. Hmm, it's interesting. You acquire him to raise up. You acquire to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance. So, in other words, when you acquire the field, you acquire Ruth along with it. Um, So let's look at the verbs here. Vayomer, knotcha is an infinitive construct. Knot with the second masculine singular pronominal suffix attached to it. Tamet, kaniti, kanitai. Again, kanita. That's from kana. Um, the he is turned into a yod because that's the historic form, and that is second masculine singular cal perfect. Lehakim is the infinitive construct in the he-fil form of kum, hence the he and the yod here. Verse 6. Vayomer Hagoel lo ucha lig al li pen Ashhit et nachalati ga'al ha ata et geulati ki lo uchal ligol. And the Redeemer said, I'm not able to redeem for myself, lest I ruin my inheritance. Redeem for yourself the my redeeming et geulati, my redemption, for I'm not able to redeem. So, in other words, the would-be Goel has abdicated his responsibility, and now it falls on Boaz to do it. So, Vayomer, we know what that is. Ukal is from Yachal, and it is a Pu'al form. Um, so, notice that the form has changed. The Yod has dropped, and now there's a Shurek Vav there. Um, and this is the imperfect first common singular. Ligal, that's the Kal infinitive construct. Ashchit is a hifil of shachat, which is to destroy or to ruin. Um, yeah, that's the hifil. Wait, I think that's hifil. Um, yeah. So I will, in the first common singular, I will ruin. Gaal is the Kal imperative masculine singular, and then Lohal, we already saw that. Ligol, infinitive construct. Verse 7. Vezot lefanim beYisrael al ha-geula va'al hatmura lekayem kol davar shalaf ish na'alo venatan lere'ehu vezot ha-te'uda beYisrael. And this is before in Israel upon the inheritance or the redemption, and upon the you want us to look this up in the lexicon. Well, do let's look at the translation. This was the custom in former times in Israel concerning a kinsman redemption and transfer of property. So yes, so this was before This was before in Israel concerning the kinsman redeemer redemption of property. To establish every matter, a man takes off his sandal and gives to his neighbor, and this is the Ta'udah in Israel. This was the custom in Israel. Yeah. So apparently, yeah, yeah. So this was an old practice that was practiced among the people in Bethlehem, particularly, in this, whenever transaction is made. There's also a bit of a hint of the law in the Torah about how if someone is not able to perform their responsibilities as a Levir, their sandal gets taken off. It's not quite the same law, but there are some striking similarities in it. And there may be shades of that going on here as well. Let me see. So, Lekayem. This is an unusual form. Not sure how to parse this one. It's definitely an infinitive construct, but I'm not entirely sure what stem it is. It is a PL. So that is the PL of the infinitive construct of kum. Shalaf is take off. It's the kal third masculine singular. Venatan is the vaiktol of Natan. Sorry, it's the vekatal. Um, in the third masculine singular. And now verse 8 it says, Vayomer Hagoel levoaz kne lach vayishlof nalo. That's a short verse. And the Redeemer said to Boaz, acquire for yourself, and he took off his sandal. Kne is from kana, to acquire. It's in the kal imperative masculine singular. Vayishlof is the Vaiktol form of shalaf in the third masculine singular. And then verse 9, Vayomer Boaz lazkenim v'chol ha'am edim atem hayom ki קניתי את כל אשר לאלימלך ואת כל אשר לחיליון ומחלון. Um, so you remember Machlon and Hilion as the names of the two deceased sons. And Boaz said to the elders and all the people um, um, present, um, Edim, you this day, wait, you are witnesses this day. Um, For I have acquired all which it belonged to Elimelech, and all which is of Machlon and Helion, or rather Helion and Machlon. So he's acquired their whole estate, in other words. So Vayomer, we know what that is. Kaniti is from Kana, and it's from Kyle Perfect, first common singular. Oh, Miyad Naomi, from the hand of Naomi. Forgot that part. And then verse 10, וגם את רות המואביה אשר מחלון קניתי לי לאישה להקים שם המת על נחלתו ולא יכרת שם המת מעם אחיו ומשאר מקומו עדים אתם היום. And also Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of Machlon, I've acquired for myself as a wife to establish the name of the dead person upon his inheritance, um, and he will not be cut off. His name will not be cut off. Um, the name of the dead one shall not be cut off from among his brothers and from the remainder of his place. You are witnesses this day. So let's parse once again. Kaniti, we already know that. Lehakim, which is the Hefil form, Hefil infinitive construct of kum. Ikaret is a Nifal form of kara. Um, in the Nifal imperfect third masculine singular. And then we've got seven. Oh, we've got that genealogy as well to translate there. So verse 11. Vayomer chol ha'am asher basha'ar vehazkenim edim yiten Adonai et ha'isha u'ha'ba'a el betecha kerachel u'kalea asher banu שתיהם את בית ישראל ועשה חיל באפרתה וקרא שם בבית לחם. And all the people said who were in at the gate, and the elders, witnesses, the Lord gave the woman who came, Haba'a, the woman who came to your house, as Rachel and as Leah, who built both of them the house of Israel, and the Asechail, and make strength. May the Lord give. Oh, sorry, this was meant to be adjussive. May the Lord give, yes, to you, the woman who may build you like Rachel and Leah. In other words, it's a little the syntax is a little bit confusing. Let's see how it'll be translated idiomatically. And all the people who are at the gate, another says, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman coming into your house as Rachel and Leah, who together built the house of Israel. May you have strength in Ephratah and bestow a name in Bethlehem. So, yes. So, may you make strength in Ephratah and may call the name in the house of bread, or Bethlehem rather. So let me see. What are the verbs here? Vayamru. We already know that. Um, the one coming. This is basically a participle form in the masculine, in the kal, feminine singular. The one coming. Banu. Um, they built. So that is from bana. In the kal, perfect, third masculine plural. And call, that's from kara. Um, so that is a. It looks like an im. That looks like a imperative in the masculine singular. Call the name in, yeah, may have and bestow a name in Bethlehem. Hmm. Let me double check. Let me see. So in verse 11. Hmm. Yep, that was call imperative. All right. So verse 12. Vayhi betcha kevet peretz asher yalda Tamar lihuda min hazera asher wait um, uh, asher yalda Tamar lihuda min hazera asher yiten Adonai lacha min hanara hazot. And may your house be like the house of Peretz, who Tamar bore to Judah from the seed which the Lord gave to you from this young woman. So Vayhi is um, the Vaiktal form. Mm, actually, yeah. Actually, no, that's not a Vaiktal. That's a Jussiv. Let it be from Haya in the third masculine singular. Yiten is the Kal imperfect third masculine singular of Natan. Yeah, Yalda is the third feminine singular Kal imperfect of Yalad, to beget. Verse 13. Vaikach Boaz et Ruth vathi lo laisha vayavo elea vaiten Adonai la herayon vateled ben. And Boaz took Ruth, and she was to him a wife, and he came to her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. So Vaikach, Vaiktol form of Lakach, third masculine singular, but he, Vaiktol form of Haya, third feminine singular, uh, Vayavo, Vaiktol form of Bo, third masculine singular, Vaiten, Vaiktol form of Natan, third masculine singular, Vataled, Victol form of Yalad, third feminine singular. All of these are in the Kal stem, as you've noticed. Verse 14. Vatomarna Hanashim El Naomi Baruch Adonai Asher Lo Hishbit Lach Goel Hayom Vaikareshmo B'Yisrael. And the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord who has not caused to be missing from you a redeemer on this day, and his name will be called in Israel." So let me see. Vatomarna is the Kal Vaiktol form of Amar in the third feminine plural. That is a relatively uncommon form, Tomarna. Um, and then you've got Hishvit, which is from Shabbat. So that is a Hefil, third masculine singular. So it's literally to be missing. So it's interesting. Um, yeah, that's an interesting one. Shabbat normally means to rest. In this context, it's more like to be missing or to be lacking, which is a relatively uncommon use of that root. Um, be that as it may, that is what it is. He is not caused to be missing a redeemer. Vaikare is the PL Vaiktol, uh, third masculine singular. All right. Verse 15. Vehaya lach, vehaya lach lemeshiv nefesh ולכלכל את שיבתך כי כלתך אשר אהבת אהבתך ילדתו אשר היו. Um, and it was to you to Mishiv. Um, okay, this one is a little tricky. Yeah. Yeah, he shall be for you a restorer of life, sustainer in your old age, your God, who loves you, who is better for you to have born him. Yeah, this one is a little tricky to translate. And he will be to you a sort of like a restorer, someone who brings back to you your soul, someone who, yeah, caused to return your soul to you. And lechalchel, um, someone who um, sort of sustains your shevate, sustains your old age for your daughter-in-law who has loved you, has born for you. She is tova lach meshivim banim, and she's better for you than 7 sons. Yeah. So, in other words, yeah. But Ruth is being blessed here because she has born a child for Naomi. So Meshiv is an interesting form. Um, so wait, Vahaya first is Vaik Tol. Actually, it's a Bakatal form of Haya, third masculine singular. And Lemeshiv is um, a participle form to restore, participle Hefil in masculine singular. And then the Khalkhel is from Khalkhal. Khalkhal is one of those relatively rare four root um, verbs, and it's the stem is pilpel here. Pilpel is again a rare root with a rare stem. Uh, just to confirm, yeah, pilpel, and it is in the infinitive construct. And then ahev, ahevatcha. So from ahav to love, this is Um, this is in the perfect, call perfect, third feminine singular. And then verse 16, Vatikach Naomi et hayeled va tashit- tashitehu becheka vecheka vathilo omenet lo omenet. And Naomi took the child and tashitehu. Uh, okay, that one's took the child, put took the child, put him in her bosom. Ah, okay, and placed him in her bosom and became to her a wet nurse. So vatikach, it's from lakach, kal vaiktol, third feminine singular, and vatashitehu. Um, this one is a little tricky. It's from sheet, which is one of the second kal yod verbs. There should be a yod here, but it has dropped. Um, and then there's a pronominal suffix here. So this is the kal Vaiktol. So yeah, Kal Vaiktol. Actually, I don't think it's the Kal, but it's definitely Vaiktol. It's in the third feminine singular. Let me double check. Yeah, it actually is a call verb. But we already know what that is. Now, verse 17. Vatikrena lo ha shchenot shem lemor yulad ben lenaomi vatikrena shmo oved. Hu avi Yishai avi David. So, and she called, and they called him Hashkenot, the one dwelling. Um, the name to to be to call, hmm, to say, a son has been born to Naomi, and they called his name Oved. He is the father of Yishai, the father of David. Let me double check that one. The women of the neighborhood. No wonder it was confusing. So Hashchenot, the women of the neighborhood. It's from Shachan. So Tikrena is the Vaiktol form of Kara in the third feminine plural. Shchenot, it's kind of a participle form of Shachan in the feminine plural. So the ones dwelling there. To say, that's the Kal infinitive construct form of Amar. Yulad is the Pual perfect third masculine singular of Yalad. Vatikrena, same as the above. So they called, so interesting. It is the women of the neighborhood who call uh, who named the child Oved. Sort of implies that the naming of the child in this case was a communal affair. Now we're gonna do the remaining verses in one go because it's basically a genealogy. Verses 18 to 22, it says, "Ve'ele toldot Peretz, el toldot Paretz. Paretz holid et Chetzron, veChetzron holid et Ram, veRam holid et Aminadav, veAminadav holid et Nachshon, uh, holid et Nachshon, veNachshon holid et Salma, veSalmon holid et Boaz, uBoaz holid et Oved, veOved holid et Yishai, veYishai holid et David." So it's very straightforward. These are generations of Peretz. Peretz begat Hetzron. Hetzron begat Ram. Ram begat Aminadav. Aminadav begat Nachshon. Nachshon begat Salma or Salmon. Salmon begat Boaz. Boaz begat Oved. Oved begat Jesse or Yishai, and Yishai or Jesse begat David. We got several instances of Holid here. Holid is the Hofal. Sorry, no, that's not a Hofal. That's the Hefil form of Yalad. Um, in the third masculine singular, um, yeah, that is a Hofal, right? Um, yes, sorry, Hefil. That's the Hefil. Yeah, is a Hefil form of Yalad, third masculine singular. Perfect. So we have just covered the entire book of Ruth in the original Hebrew. And after this, we got four more lessons where we will cover the remaining um, weak verbs and translate the book of Jonah. So I hope you've enjoyed this. So tune in next time. Hmm.
Sorry about that, Lewis. Yeah, thank you for that. By the way, let me turn my speakers down here because I had the speakers on instead of listening to the headphones. One second.
Yep, no problem.
There we go. That should cut down on the feedback. I appreciate you doing this so much, Lewis.
Yes. Yeah, hopefully those who've managed to survive this far into the course do as well.
I appreciate you so much and
Yeah.
looking forward to the next one. All right, that's gonna do it, y'all. We'll see you later. God bless.
See you